All right. Ready to dive into some really interesting stuff today.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to be talking about phone habits.
Okay, cool.
Specifically, how different generations in Austria are using their smartphones these days.
Sounds good.
So we found this recent Austrian study, and we're going to be digging into that.
Interesting.
And I think there are going to be some really interesting findings that come out for you today.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
So to kick us off, I think the most interesting thing that we found right off the bat was this paradox that's kind of emerged,
Oh, okay.
where practically everyone has a smartphone,
Right.
but actually using it to talk on the phone is becoming less and less common.
Yeah, especially for like younger generations.
Totally. And actually,
Like Gen Z,
yeah,
they're texting way more
right. It's so true.
than actually calling.
And this study actually found that only 14% of Austrians could imagine going a week without their smartphones.
Wow.
That's it,
That's a really small number.
which is wild to me.
Yeah, that is pretty wild.
Especially because when they asked how many could give up alcohol for a week, it was 77%.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like our smartphones have really surpassed even like our biggest vices
Yeah, you're not kidding.
in terms of what we consider essential these days.
It's true.
But this is where the generational divide gets really fascinating.
Okay.
They found that Gen Z, so those born after 1996,
Right.
check their smartphones 3 times more often than baby boomers do
Wow.
per day.
It's a big difference.
Yeah, so that's a median of 32 times a day for Gen Z,
Wow.
compared to just 11 for baby boomers.
I mean, that's still a lot.
That is a lot. 11 times a day.
Yeah.
But 32.
Yeah, that's
Constant.
It's like, what are they doing on there?
I know that's what I want to know.
Right.
But it's not even just checking it.
Right.
It's like this constant engagement.
Yeah, they're using these devices for everything.
Yeah.
Like communication, entertainment, even like banking.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I just think that constant connection really shapes the way they interact with the world.
Totally. And how they view the world.
Totally.
So, okay. So we know that Gen Z can't seem to get enough of their phones,
Right.
but what are they actually doing on them all the time?
Well, one thing this study highlighted is that 73% of Austrians prefer text and voice messages over making a call,
Okay.
which is a trend that's especially strong among Gen Z.
For sure.
Yeah.
So instead of picking up the phone, it's all about like the carefully crafted text or voice note.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I can relate to that for sure.
Me too.
But what is behind that shift, especially for Gen Z?
Well, I think you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes for a minute.
Okay.
Texting gives you time to think.
It does.
You can craft the perfect response.
Right.
There's no awkward silences,
Totally.
and you don't have to think on the spot.
Which can be really hard,
It can be so hard.
especially when it's something important.
Exactly. And that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, regardless of their generation.
Yeah.
So it allows for more control and efficiency, which is really important in our world today.
It's so fast-paced,
Exactly.
and everyone's trying to multitask.
Totally.
So it's like you can kind of present the best, most thought-out version of yourself,
Exactly.
even if it's just like a casual conversation.
Right. It takes the pressure off a little bit.
It really does.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense that they would gravitate towards that.
For sure.
But it's not just about efficiency, right?
You're right. It's not just about efficiency.
It's also about emotional management.
Exactly.
Like for Gen Z, texting can be a way to control their emotions, right?
Especially in awkward or like difficult conversations.
Totally.
Which again are really common.
Yeah, for sure. So texting can be a way to kind of control the situation a little bit,
Right.
especially in those trickier conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about those times when you really want to hear someone's voice
Right.
and like share in the emotion of a moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is where it gets interesting again with these different generations.
Okay, tell me more.
So when it comes to sharing good news,
Okay.
the study found that baby boomers overwhelmingly prefer a phone call.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right.
They want to hear you be excited.
Yes.
They want to have that connection.
Totally. It's like that instant connection, you know,
Totally.
that back and forth.
Exactly. You can share in that joy together, like in real time.
Right, because there's nothing quite like hearing the joy in someone's voice when you have good news to share.
Yeah, you're right.
But for Gen Z, a text message, maybe with some emojis or a voice note, is good enough.
Totally. It does the trick.
It does the trick.
They still want to share,
Oh, for sure.
but it's on their terms and in a way that feels most natural to them.
With the tools that they're comfortable with.
Exactly.
So good news is one thing, but what about when you have to deliver bad news?
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other story.
The study hinted at some interesting stuff there, too.
Definitely. So for delivering bad news, baby boomers generally feel like a phone call is the most empathetic and sensitive approach.
Right, because you can be there for the person,
Exactly.
offer support in real time.
And like navigate the conversation.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's about that human touch.
Exactly.
Like being truly present with someone during a difficult time.
I think that's so important.
It is. But for Gen Z, sending a text can actually feel like the more considerate option,
Interesting.
which seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does a little bit.
But they think about it like this.
Okay.
It lets them carefully consider their words
Yeah.
because you have that time to think it through.
You do.
And it avoids putting someone on the spot emotionally
Yeah, that makes sense.
because then the other person can also take their time to process
Right.
and react without feeling
Yeah.
that pressure,
Exactly. It gives them the space to process on their own terms.
which I think can be really hard regardless of your generation.
It is. We all process things differently.
It's true. And sometimes we just need a minute
Exactly.
before we can really talk about something.
Exactly.
So it's not about one generation getting it right and the other getting it wrong.
Right.
It's just about recognizing that there are all these different communication styles.
Totally.
And what feels right for one person might not feel right for another.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just Gen Z and baby boomers.
Right. Where do millennials and Gen X fit into all of this?
Yeah.
They're in the mix too.
They are. So millennials, they kind of straddle the line
Okay.
between Gen Z and baby boomers.
So they grew up with the technology.
Exactly. They're digital natives in a lot of ways.
Right.
But they also remember a time before smartphones.
Okay, interesting.
So they're fluent in both texting and talking.
But they might have a preference.
Yeah, depending on the situation.
Okay.
Like they might fire off a quick text to make plans with friends,
Right.
but then pick up the phone when they want to have a deeper conversation.
Or if something's really important.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then there's Gen X.
Right. The generation that's seen it all.
They've seen it all from landlines to the internet to smartphones.
They've adapted so much.
So much.
I bet they're pros at communication.
They're like chameleons. They can adapt to any style.
That's amazing.
They appreciate texting, but
Yeah.
they're not afraid to pick up the phone when they need to.
Especially if they need to get something done.
And exactly. Or if they want that personal touch.
So they really are the bridge generation.
Totally. They're like the interpreters of the communication world.
I love that.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, with all of these different communication styles, are we losing something?
What do you mean?
Like, are we losing that personal connection?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we're more connected than ever.
We are, but are we really connecting?
Right. Are we sacrificing genuine connection in the process?
What do you think?
That's a tough one. You know, I don't think it's as simple as saying technology is ruining human connection.
Okay.
If anything, I think it's amplified our desire for it.
Okay. So,
Well, we're constantly seeking ways to connect.
Right.
We want to share our experiences, build relationships,
That's true.
and whether it's through a text, a voice note, or even a good old-fashioned phone call, the human need for connection is still there.
yeah, that's a good point.
It's just finding new ways to express those needs as communication evolves.
So it's not about technology replacing connection,
Right.
but rather changing how we express it.
You got it.
So it's not about replacing that connection,
Yeah,
but it's definitely changing how we express it.
it really is. And I think that's where things can get a little tricky.
For sure, because there are so many ways to communicate these days.
Exactly. And what might seem totally normal to one generation could be like a huge faux pas to another.
You're so right. It's like we're all speaking different languages sometimes.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the whole etiquette of phone use is so important now.
Okay, so give me some examples, like what kind of etiquette differences do we need to be aware of?
Well, think about what we were just talking about with Gen Z and texting.
Right, like
Yeah.
even for those more serious conversations.
Exactly. The study found that 81% of baby boomers think you should always answer a phone call.
Wow.
But 60% of Gen Z think it's totally fine to just send a text back.
Oh, wow. That's like a totally different way of thinking.
Right. It's a completely different mindset.
And that's not even getting into things like speakerphone in public,
Oh, yeah. Good point.
which we know baby boomers are not fans of.
Definitely not.
Or like texting while you're having a face-to-face conversation.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
It can be a recipe for disaster.
Totally. And it just goes to show how much these unspoken rules can really impact our interactions.
Totally, because we might not even realize that we're doing something wrong.
Exactly. And then it's easy to misinterpret things or feel like someone's not being respectful.
It's true, and I think that's why having these conversations is so important.
I totally agree.
Because if we can at least try to be more aware of those generational differences
Right.
and those little etiquette cues,
Yeah.
it can help us bridge those communication gaps.
Absolutely.
and hopefully build stronger connections.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, we all just want to connect with each other.
We do. And whether it's through a text, a
Mhm.
call, a voice note, or even just meeting up in person,
Yeah,
it's about being mindful and adaptable.
I love that word adaptable.
Because we have to be these days.
We do think about the person on the other end of that communication.
Right.
What are their communication preferences,
Yeah.
and how can you meet them in the middle?
It's not about being right or wrong.
Right.
It's about understanding where the other person's coming from.
You got it.
I love it. Well, there you have it.
A crash course in phone etiquette.
A crash course in phone habits across the generations.
Exactly.
We've covered the good, the bad, and the totally unexpected.
It's been a journey.
It has, and now we want to hear from you.
Yes. Tell us about your experiences.
Have you encountered these generational differences firsthand?
I bet you have.
I think we all have.
Share your stories with us.
Head over to our social media pages and let us know.
We're dying to hear from you.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.